Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindie Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, November the 21st, 2018. It is 2 p.m. New York time. That's 11 a.m. Los Angeles time and 7 p.m. London time. And if I do the math properly, that's, I believe, 6 a.m. Sydney, Australia time. So now we've covered the time zones. We're actually a couple hours early, so I'm not used to doing it with these times because Cindie had an unexpected and kind of last minute change in the schedule that we had to deal with. So we wanted to get the podcast in, so we're doing it at this time. And we also ran into a glitch because when we tried to do the live stream to the Facebook Law of Attraction Change My Life group, Facebook said, okay, go. Here's the pop-up, and there was no pop-up. And I went to check my pop-up settings, and it says pop-ups are allowed. So we're kind of under the assumption that Facebook's still having a few problems from the last couple days. And I'm sure they'll get it straightened out. We'll get it figured out. But in the meantime, we're just going back to doing it the way we've always done it, Cindie, doing it just a regular podcast. And we're going to record the video, too. We left a note in the Facebook group, so hopefully people who wanted to listen there will be able to find us on the homepage of our website and also through the Blue Jeans platform. So I'm going to keep the chat open, Cindie, just in case somebody finds us on the Blue Jeans platform and wants to raise a question there.
Questions.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we want to have the questions. I mean, even if Facebook isn't cooperating, doesn't mean we can't get questions, right?
Yeah. And, I was thinking when we were having this little glitch, because we have glitches
they happen
in life.
Yep.
And I was thinking I actually wrote an article that won't be published till tomorrow, but about being thankful for every single thing. And how there are so many things in the world going on right now that seem like they're just impossible to feel thankful for. But one thing we know is that, if any one tiny thing was changed, then it would change whatever's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
Like in our own lives, we talk about that around our home all the time, is that especially because we're so happy to be together and we think, if any one thing in our life would have been different, we might not have met each other.
This
so
is
it's
true.
like, okay, so it's all good. And so I think about when little things like this happen, you know what? It's all good. It's all going to work out exactly the way it should work out. So
I think so. By the way, I had I was doing some other stuff, of course, between the early morning podcast that we did and then this one. And at one point, I kind of got back here into the office and I was dealing with a couple things, but I logged into Facebook and found that Nasha, one of our listeners, had sent me a private message. And so we had a conversation going on, which was nice. And I got to tell you, she's one of the most supportive people we've got. She's been trying to post the shows to her timeline. She actually ran into a problem there, didn't realize that if you try to share something from the Facebook group, because it's a private group, it won't show on anybody else's timeline who's not a member. So they can't get it. It says content not available or something like that. So she's going to start recommending people become members of the group now so that they can actually see the videos, which is cool.
Hey, isn't that great? Yes,
she was just so supportive, just fabulously supportive. She's a complete fan of ours and really, really, really good. In fact, we were kind of talking, I won't give away the contents of the conversation, of course, but we were kind of talking similar to what you and I were talking about during the podcast. You brought up the pruning shears of revision and how important it is to kind of change the way our history happened in our minds so that we can get into that better feeling place more directly. We didn't actually use that phrase, but that's what we were talking about. She was talking about different ways that there have been challenges, and it's all about changing that history in our mind. And she was doing it in the conversation, which was really great.
That is really great.
Yeah.
It's really great. I spoke with someone yesterday who was doing the same thing, and had also. And what I really loved is that the person I spoke with yesterday was telling me about something they were practicing, and they used the word vignette. So
oh, yeah.
That's the word we've been using. That's not really a Neville word.
No, it's our word.
It's perfect, right?
It
So
is.
I thought, oh, yes. That's really exciting. And I was excited just to hear about that work and what was going on, for this person. So it's all good and it's all exciting. Thank you so much for sharing and for, telling other people and for listening yourself and for asking the great questions. Because That was really fun this morning with questions coming in.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm a little disappointed that we can't get the live stream going today because those questions are fun. I'm hoping some people will follow us over, and I'll actually monitor that post that I put on the Facebook page just in case somebody tries to put a question there. But well, I'm looking forward to doing more of that, more and more of it.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I'm really feeling good about this live streaming we've been doing because we're getting people involved, first of all, who didn't know about the podcast in the first place. But secondly, I mean, I've been saying over and over again what my goal is. My goal is to get us up into the tens of thousands of listeners. You know, I'm setting my goal as high as I can believe and all that kind of thing. And people are coming back and saying, you're going to get there. It's going to happen. It's like this. It's this feedback mechanism that just that feedback mechanism just feels great when it happens, and I love it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's not that it's going to happen; it is happening.
It is happening. Yeah, right.
We're watching it happen. We're watching it happen.
We're in the middle of it. We're experiencing it, which is pretty cool.
It's in the process of hardening into reality.
That's it. There's the phrase.
Yeah.
And I'm very pleased to say I got my book today. My book showed up in the mail, so I can now be reading from the book instead of from the webpage while we're doing Neville stuff, and I'm loving that.
So you're going to break out the highlighters, right?
I don't highlight books. I'm sorry. I just don't do that.
I know. I'm just teasing.
Are you kidding? That's defacing a book. Are you kidding?
Like, my book is full of highlighters and all kinds of markers, but it's funny because I can't stand to dog ear a book. I don't know why, but I will write all over it.
I think that's funny. Librarians everywhere are cringing at your story. They're saying, well, thank you for not dog earing, but that's as far as they're willing to go.
Occasionally I buy a used book, and if it arrives, twice I've bought a used copy of a book and it's arrived and been a signed copy.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Right? And then lots of times I've bought a used copy of a book and it's arrived and it's just been all marked up with thoughts and ideas and highlighter. And I always get so excited when I see that because that means that somebody, took away a lot of goodness out of it and they're conversing with it. As a writer and an author, I always realize that it's not just about me writing. It's about the reader reading. It's a conversation that we're having, right? They have input. And so I like when the input gets shown up on the hard copy like that. It's evidence. So.
I got to ask you then. So if you get a book that's marked up, and since you're a person who marks up the books, do you compare notes, so to speak? Do you read the way the other person read it?
What's interesting to me is that sometimes I'll buy a book that I've read already. Mm-hmm. And then misplace my copy or whatever. Right. Or maybe I used to check a lot of books out of the library. So I'd have a book that I really loved and think, I want to own that book and I want to read it again. So I'll order a copy. And sometimes it's a book that's out of print or something. I'll find a used copy. Right. And it arrives. And what I think is so interesting, and it reminds me of the exchanges we have on the podcast, because I will get a book and there will be certain passages highlighted that I never would have highlighted. And what it makes me do is take a second look at that passage.
Oh, I see. Rethink it.
Somebody really thought this was important. And when I read it, it didn't really ring any bells for me. And I'll go back and read it sort of with fresh eyes, thinking, okay. And that reminds me sometimes of our conversations, because we'll read a paragraph and you'll say, well, this is what stood out to me. And it's like, oh, wow. Once I hear your thoughts on it, it seems like a different paragraph to me, because those aren't the things that maybe stood out to me right away. So I don't know. It's all fun. It's like a fun thing to get a book that someone else is. It's like a book club. Someone else is giving you their input. Okay.
The Write 'em Up book club. Write up the books.
That's right. That's right.
That's great.
So let's see. Before we are starting on a new chapter. We're still reading The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard, and we're starting chapter 4. But I want to make sure that we get our promos in before we begin.
Absolutely. And we got a couple things to add to the promos now, so they're a little bit longer than usual. But first and foremost, of course, become a subscriber if you're not yet a subscriber. Most of the places where you can see this podcast have links in them that you can click on to just do it right away really easily. If you don't have a link or you can't find a link, just go to the homepage of the website, loatoday.net. You won't be able to miss them. They are so big there. And you'll be able to just click your way through. And then once you're a subscriber, please do share. And pursuant to the experience that our listener had, I want to remind people, if you are sharing the video from the group where we've been podcasting to, where we're live streaming to, except for today because we can't do it for whatever reason, if you've been sharing those videos, it will only be visible to somebody who's also a member of the group. So if you've been getting feedback from people saying, well, it says content not available, that's why. It's because they're not members of the group. So there are a couple of workarounds. Obviously, you could also invite them to be members of the group, so that way they could get the videos that way. Also, there's a YouTube channel that I set up, and I'll punch a link out there for people to find that channel, where I'm now upstreaming the videos on the video feed, so that there's at least an alternative way to get there. And you can usually find all this through our Facebook business page, the LOA Today page on Facebook. So a number of ways to get there, but don't despair if they're not able to see the videos. That's why. It's just because Facebook doesn't want private content in closed groups to be available to everybody. Also, and this is, I think, the second day I've been saying this, I want people to send us any kind of comments or suggestions that you might have about what kinds of content you'd like to see. I mean, we're pretty creative here. Among us 12 people who are doing these various podcast episodes, we come up with a lot of interesting stuff. But there's nothing like, putting out there what our listeners want to hear. So send an email to me. My email is walt@loatoday.net, or send us, a message to any of us through Facebook or Messenger or whatever. Send us a tweet, whatever it takes. Just there's a contact form on the website, loatoday.net. Whatever way you do it, send us a message and just tell us, what would you like to see? What, maybe there's a question you want us to answer. We've actually done entire episodes on one question that one listener sent in, and it's fun. We love it. It's so much fun to do that kind of thing. So, please tell us what you want, because when you tell us what you want, hey, it's like the law of attraction, right? You got to put it out there if you want to get it back.
Yes. Yes, it's true. And what I really love is like when people have a specific situation that they're dealing with, and we've had a few questions like that, where it's like, here's what I'm dealing with, what's your advice? And these are, when you're asking for advice, that's one thing, but when you're asking for advice specifically on how to use the law of attraction to your benefit in a situation you're in, that's a lot of fun for us, I think, to dive into, and it's useful, right? To get, it's like the idea of a mastermind is that two or more people come together and they each have their own mind and their own ideas. But when they all bring those ideas together, there's like a mind formed from all those ideas that it's greater than the sum of its parts. So it's a mastermind. And brainstorming sessions like that can really be powerful and effective. So if you bring a question to the chat or email us, or, you get it to us, however, we'll be able to talk with you and brainstorm with you and come up with a solution that'll be a way that you can deal with the issue, whatever it is. So that's a lot of fun too.
It is a lot of fun. And it's also good to remember that sometimes people might feel a little bit funny putting their stuff out there because, well, it's only relevant to them and won't be interesting to anybody else. But the fact is, these questions are so universal, even when they're specific to ourselves. We always pick something up when we hear about somebody else's question being addressed. Always.
Right. And the other thing is that when different people are inputting, we just like we were talking about marking up the books, when someone else highlights a the passage, it's like we'll have probably however many people are, there'll be even more ideas. And so it takes the weight off you from trying to figure out what can I do.
Yep.
Different people giving you ideas, and some of them might not resonate with you, but some of them might be, yes, that's exactly, the thing that would help. So I think it's a great idea. Keep those cards and letters coming. Absolutely.
And I promise that if you are a bookmarker, I won't hold it against you. So don't worry about that.
That's really funny. When I found out you didn't have the Neville book, I should have just sent you a copy full of highlights.
That would have been a great joke. That would have been funny. I would have loved that.
And then you would have just thrown the book at the wall. Okay,
I would have held it up and said, "Look at all the highlights in the book."
So funny. Well, let's see where we are. Chapter 4. We've covered so far The first chapter, this is from memory. The first chapter was I Am, about
Right.
I Am stories, the power of I Am. The second chapter was...
Consciousness.
I might have to look. What was it?
Consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the third chapter that we finished up this morning was about assumptions, specifically assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And now this chapter 4, is desire. So we'll dive in. And we can probably cover this chapter in one podcast, but you know us.
That's what we've said before.
Okay, so Neville says desire.
We're the only podcast I know that can actually do an entire podcast on a sentence. I mean, that's actually happened. I'm just saying.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely happened. And this is our I think this is our 117th podcast together. So,
something like that, yeah.
It's probably happened more than once.
Probably more than once, yes.
And apologies to anyone who's like, oh my gosh, they did a whole podcast on one sentence. I hope that's not the case. All right, so desire. The changes which take place in your life as a result of your changed concept of yourself always appear to the unenlightened to be the result not of a change of consciousness, but of chance, outer cause, or coincidence.
Yeah, I always thought that.
Right?
Yeah, until I heard about law of attraction. I in fact, even when I first heard about law of attraction, I said, no, that's not the way it works. It's laws of chance. That's the way it works.
or coincidence.
Yep.
I say so many times, I don't believe there is any coincidence. I don't believe anything's random.
So I think coincidence does exist. I just now understand that coincidence doesn't mean that they're not related. Coincidence means two things happening coincidentally. They happen at the same moment, That doesn't mean they're not related.
So correct. So they're synchronous is what you're saying.
They're synchronous, yeah.
But I think when most people use that word, they mean it's an accident.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, okay, so it says, however, the only fate governing your life is the fate determined by your own concepts, your own assumptions. For an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Now, there's that term that we like to use, something hardening into fact.
I like that word.
We talked this morning about creating a vignette and watching it harden into fact, watching certain things in that scene become reality, and it's so much fun. So this term, though, this word he uses, though false, I want to talk about that for a minute, because if Neville says the only fate governing your life is the fate determined by your own concepts and your own assumptions, okay. Then he says, for an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. I think he's talking about the thing we create in our imagination, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
If we're assuming, so some people would say, but that's not real.
Exactly.
It's not true. It's just in your imagination. I actually was teaching some of these techniques to someone years ago, and they said, no, I don't want to feel happy just because I'm imagining that thing. I won't be happy until the thing happens. They were very resistant to letting the imagination, to assuming the feeling of the wish, right? Because the feeling of the wish fulfilled is a good feeling.
Yeah.
It feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were really concerned that they would just end up, like the meditator on the mountaintop, sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop somewhere in bliss and still not having the thing, but they're just happy enough because they can imagine it.
Yep.
I think I got the feeling it was like, no, I don't want to feel good because I've learned how to imagine that I won't be happy until the thing happens. I thought, well, okay, well, you might be waiting a long time.
It reminds me of the story we told this morning about how if you tell a kid that he's going to Disney World and he gets all excited and he jumps up and down, right? Imagine telling the kid, no, you can't jump up and down until you actually get to Disney World. It's like, that would be impossible.
Right. And yet, we learn how to resist.
Yeah, we do.
As we get older, some of us become champion resistors.
Oh,
right?
yes.
So, yeah. So, for an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. I want to say, for an assumption, even though it's something that begins just in your imagination, if you hold the vision and you stay with it and you keep practicing, it will become manifest in your reality.
Mm-hmm.
My paraphrase, which is much longer than his, but but I just think it's interesting he used the word false, because he talks so much about this thing you're imagining is real,
mm-hmm.
and that it's real now, and that you have to recognize and believe that it's real now. And now he's using the word so false, and I can picture people saying, yeah, what do you mean you're imagining that? It's not even real.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in your head. So if we persist, it will harden into fact. The ideal you seek and hope to attain will not manifest itself, will not be realized by you until you have imagined that you are already that ideal.
There's a new way of using the word ideal. That's a very new way of using the word ideal, because that's not the way I normally think of that word. I mean, I understand what he's saying, but an ideal for me is more like a high level moral standard or something like that. But he's treating an ideal like it's an event or like it's an experience, which is not the same thing at all. But it's good. I like it. It's just different.
And notice that he says, until you have imagined that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in the chapter we finished up this morning, he talks about the ideal concept of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting because I remember a friend that I had at one time saying something like, well, there's ideal and then there's reality. That we all have ideals we want to shoot for, and then we have to settle for what actually happens.
Yeah, that's
reality.
That's the pragmatic viewpoint.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So here, when he says, until you have imagined that you are already that ideal, I think he's pointing to the ideal concept of ourselves, which is the person that already has whatever it is you're trying to create.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I'm using my most recent example of getting married a couple weeks ago, that my ideal would have been that I already am the person who is married.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Even before I was. And I told you that, when I started that vignette of celebrating the thing I'm creating next, I was just practicing the vignette. And we were in a restaurant and we made a toast, and we were celebrating something. We made a toast. That was it. Probably the 20th time that I imagined that vignette, and I was feeling my feet on the floor and I was feeling my hands on the table, and I felt a wedding ring on my finger. Like, oh, and I could really feel it. So things kept popping in that I wasn't really going after. Like I remember saying, I looked down and I saw the shoes that I had on, a specific pair of shoes. So it started hardening into fact. More little realities started creeping into it. And then those things manifested.
Mm.
So that's the ideal. It's not an ideal we can't reach. It's an ideal about who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that we are that person that already has that thing, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So he says there's no escape for you except by a radical psychological transformation of yourself, except by your assumption of the feeling of your wish fulfilled. So I think it's interesting that he uses the word escape. Because, well, what are we trying to escape?
Good question.
Right? Loneliness, ill health, poverty, lack, depression. When we start this work, many times there is something that we want to escape, something that we want to let go of or be rid of, right?
Mm-hmm.
What comes up for you when you hear that word? Because it's an odd word to me, but I think it's really fitting.
It's an odd word. It is fitting. I have to say, I never really thought about it in terms of escaping from something. Well, that's not true. Not never. I would say I used to think about it in terms of escaping. Since I learned the politically correct way to say things in law of attraction, then I stopped trying to say it in terms of escaping and started saying it in terms of where I was going to. But, yeah, I guess it is kind of escaping. Because if you're in poverty, you want to escape the poverty. You want to leave it behind. It's a good point. If you're in poor health, you want to escape that poor health. You want to get back to feeling great again, living your life to the fullest, and so forth.
Well, something else that comes up is that if I think about the word escape, generally speaking, I mean, what comes to me is that somebody who is trapped,
imprisoned, yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the way it feels. When you're in that place where you don't feel like you can get to from A to B and you want to be at B and B seems far away, it does feel like a prison. It does feel trapped.
And we used the word this morning, or the idea of victim energy.
Yeah.
Right? That place where it's like, poor me.
Exactly.
Everything's going wrong. There's nothing I can do about it. And when you think about an actual someone who is victimized, like in the world, like they're robbed or mugged or raped or attacked, or they're a victim, or maybe they're a victim of something catastrophic like tornadoes or forest fires. They want to escape. And so what's interesting to me is that we've been talking about victim consciousness, which is someone who doesn't have the ability yet to consciously create because they're not tapping into that tool. They're not assuming the feeling of the wish.
Right.
And so, yeah, they're all about wanting to escape something because it's that level of consciousness of being a victim.
That's true.
He says this is the only way you're going to escape. A radical psychological transformation of yourself, your assumption of the feeling. So this is powerful stuff.
It is.
He says, therefore, make results or accomplishments the crucial test of your ability to use your imagination. Everything depends on your attitude towards yourself.
Boy, is that true. Seriously, I mean, is there anything in life where that is not true? There isn't one. Everything depends on your attitude toward yourself. It's not just your attitude; it's your self-esteem. That's not what I'm looking for. It's how you feel about yourself. It's your feeling about yourself. Because if you don't feel really, really good about yourself, you're in a bad place. Not just in a bad place in terms of feeling bad, in terms of what's going to work out and what's not going to work out in your life. That's what I think. That's what I hear when I say everything depends upon that attitude.
Well, I think it starts with self-love. And this is why I thought it was so great that Neville was talking about the subconscious, using a metaphor of the conscious and the subconscious as lovers.
Right.
And saying that the subconscious, it loves you unconditionally. Which is why whatever idea you give it, it just creates. So we need to be smart and give it good ideas instead of stories about ourselves that create something we don't want. But it starts with being willing to show ourselves love. I like to say it that way because when we say love ourselves, that's a big trigger for people that come up with things they don't love about themselves. Like,
good point.
If they're like they're feeling ashamed of something or feeling upset about some choice they made in the past.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
And so it's like they're feeling like, well, I don't love myself very much because I'm disappointed in myself or whatever. But when we think about showing love to ourselves and being willing to show love to ourselves, we can think about the willingness we have to love a child even when they do something that disappoints us.
Good point.
Right? And so we can make that intention to show love to ourselves. And the mirror work is a great way to do it. And you know that because you had a great experience with doing mirror work.
Absolutely. And I'm going back to
I remember you saying you were on day 50 or something, and it was like, wow, it's still going.
Yeah, I got to get back to it too because it really does pay off. The thing that I've noticed since then is what it is that I was actually going after. I thought I was going after getting rid of that negative self-talk that flies around your head when you don't want it to, and I was. That was my initial impetus behind it. But what I learned after the fact is what I was really going after was the self-criticism. constantly harping on myself. I did this wrong. I didn't do this. I didn't get that done. This is frustrating to me. Just constantly berating myself in little tiny ways, not big ways, not beating myself over the head with a cudgel, but just little ways, just gnawing away at myself. And once I stopped doing that because of the mirror exercises had basically taken that negative self-talk away, it felt so much better, first of all. But second of all, that became a new route, so to speak, to the true self-love that you're talking about, because you were just describing it in very beautiful terms about really appreciating yourself and feeling good about what's going on in your life, and you were expressing it all in positives. So often we express what's going on with ourselves in the negative, and we don't even realize it, but we're beating ourselves up when we do that.
I hear it all the time. People will be in the midst of doing something and have a small accident, right? Drop a stack of papers or something, and immediately say to themselves, "Oh, what an idiot!"
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I'm so stupid. Look what I've done."
Right.
Things like that. And it's like, most of us wouldn't talk to our dogs that way. We'd never talk to our children that way. We wouldn't, that's not showing love. We want to be kind. And so, we all have done things that we feel disappointed in ourselves about at one time or another, but it's not about that. It's not about believing that you are perfect and every single thing you've ever done was exactly, the highest level of achievement. It just means that you are willing to show yourself love. And there's lots of ways we can do it. We talked about this morning about when someone gives you a compliment.
Yeah.
Just accept it. Say thank you.
Yeah.
Instead of deflecting it. So I think that's where it starts. I mean, he says your attitude towards yourself. And so a loving attitude, a kind and loving attitude towards ourselves.
I love you.
Something we say to each other, be gentle, right?
Be gentle, yeah.
Be gentle to yourself.
I love the way that you juxtapose the way we would treat others compared to the way we treat ourselves. That we're really very cruel to ourselves in a way that we would never be toward anybody else. We are harder on ourselves than anybody. And that's really what we need to turn around, because, oh my goodness, if there's anybody who deserves to be treated well by us, it's us.
Right? There's a saying that one of my mentors said. He said, if we treated other people the way we treat ourselves, we'd all be in jail.
Right. This is true.
Yeah, we can be really hard on ourselves. So I was saying a couple days ago that when I was very young, in my very early 20s, I don't know if I'm 19 or 20 years old, that I heard this conversation going on. People were discussing God and religion and Adam and Eve and the chicken and the egg and all these, concepts.
I didn't know that was in Genesis.
I was just listening, and a young woman that was probably a few years older than me, but still probably mid-20s, and I always thought really that she was kind of a space cadet. I mean, that's the way I would have thought about her. And she said, God, this was her exact statement. I'm pretty sure it's seared into my brain. She said, I myself am God, and the whole universe is just a reflection of my love relationship with myself. And I was like, what a nutcase. Seriously, I was not buying it. I was like, right? And then fast forward me, 10 years, I'm like, I think I've got something there.
Oh, that's funny.
So who's the nutcase now, right?
Yeah, right.
I wasn't buying it. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for it.
I just wondered what happened to the missing verse from Genesis that talked about the chicken and the egg. I just never saw that one.
The chicken came first.
Oh, okay. And God created the chicken.
The chicken came out of an egg that probably didn't come from a chicken. We could talk about this all day. And if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around. But so our attitude towards ourselves, everything depends on it. Everything that you're experiencing is directly connected to your concept of yourself, your sense of identity, I mean, that's it.
It is.
In a nutshell. So I like this sentence, and I feel like we've read a sentence like this from Neville before, this next one. He says, that which you will not affirm as true of yourself can never be realized by you. For that attitude alone is the necessary condition by which you realize your goal.
I wonder what some of the things are that he has in mind for that. That which you will not affirm as true of yourself. What are some of those things, I wonder?
Well, I think it's the opposite of whatever it is we're trying to create.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In other words, when someone has an idea of themselves that no one will ever love them, that they're not lovable.
Yeah.
And I've had this spoken to me before, that someone has said, I'm not lovable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they won't affirm as true of them that they're lovable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're not going to realize it. It's not going to be a reality in their life until they can affirm it as true.
And I guess that's going to be true for everything. It's going to be true if you're looking for money. I will never be a wealthy person. You just confirmed it. Right. I will never get over this chronic disease that I have. I will never have a brand new car. I will never be able to get a new house. I will never just fill in the blank.
Well, and the money thing is tricky because so many people have a belief, and it might even be a submerged belief. It's not totally out in front. It's kind of like a covert belief. But when we hear certain statements when we're very young and we're getting brought up in a certain way. Like we talked about this, a story that I heard of someone who their grandfather would drive them to school and they had to drive through a very wealthy neighborhood with a lot of big cars and big mansions. And the grandfather would say, oh, look at these big houses. Who would ever want to waste all their money on something like that? Who would ever want to live in a house that big?
Mm-hmm.
Who would, that's nonsense, right? Or people that say, that categorize anybody that's rich as being a bad person. Those awful rich people.
We did a whole series on that.
Right. Yes. If we create a story like that, well, we don't want to be an awful person and we don't want to be a ridiculous person.
Yeah.
So we'll hold ourselves away from that because that keeps us safe, right? It keeps us as a part of our own family that believes that these things are bad. So sometimes, and that's what we talked about this morning with Neville saying, when we talked about your whole being, believing it with your whole being, right? Well, if I say, well, part of me wants to have a lot of money, but there's part of me that's worried that my family doesn't like rich people. And that part of me wants the love of my family. And so do you have the divided will is happening there? It's like, I'm caught, So until we can get to the place where we have a united will, and that means all of us is on board, we can believe in it and accept it and assume it with our whole being, then it can be tricky to get there.
It can. Yep.
Yeah.
But it shows how important the work is because it is tricky sometimes, and therefore it's something we need to work through. Because if we don't work through it, we basically are staying in the trap. We're staying in that victim mode that we were talking about a moment ago.
Right. I was reading somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but it was a woman telling her story. It might have been Janine Roth, but I'm not completely certain. But someone telling their story about that the way their mother always showed love for them was to give them sweets. Bake cookies and cakes and bring them candy, and that was her way of showing love.
Right.
And so this woman was like overweight and wanting to lose weight and wanting to stop eating those things.
Yeah.
But really, every time she tried it, just felt like a rejection of her mother's love because that's how her mom showed love to her. And so, those things can be tricky, but here's the good news, and that is when we become aware of those patterns, and oftentimes we will become aware of them when we start doing this work because we recognize, oh, that's what it is. Yeah. I'm trying to create something and there's something in me that's holding back. If we can get honest with ourselves and do the work, ask ourselves the questions,
Yeah, it's nice when it pops up. No, well, I shouldn't say nice. It's helpful when something pops up and we're able to identify what it is because it makes it easier to get through it.
I love it. I love it. It's always the most comfortable thing to have an aha moment about yourself and some belief that's surfaced, but it's always still great because it's like, oh, that's what it is. Okay, now I can move past it.
Yeah, whenever something like that pops up for me, I always have the same reaction. I'm not sure how to describe what the reaction is, except perhaps to replicate it by saying, "Oh, such and such happened." That I mean, how do you describe what that is? It's a feeling of, oh, like almost like the light came on or something. Just something appeared out of nowhere that wasn't there before. Oh, yeah. There it is.
It's an epiphany.
An epiphany. There it is. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. Okay, so let's see. Neville says, all transformation is based upon suggestion, and this can work only where you lay yourself completely open to an influence. You must abandon yourself to your ideal as a woman abandons herself to love. For complete abandonment of self to it is the way to union with your ideal.
Can we go back to that first sentence? Go back to that first sentence. The end of it says, where you lay yourself completely open to an influence. What do you think he means by an influence? It's a kind of unusual selection for a word there. This can only work only when you lay yourself completely open to an influence.
And the way I read that is that in order to influence someone, you have to have their buy-in. Right? And so, in other words, whatever you're suggesting or whatever you're wanting to give them has to be in some measure something that they also want.
Or at least can receive in some way.
Right? If you tell me, here's what I really want. I want to make $1 million, and I don't want to have to work, really, really hard for it. Mm-hmm. And then I say, well, hey, I have a deal over here. There's an opportunity. If you'll work 20 hours a day for 30 years, I don't have your buy-in. It's like that has nothing to do with what you just said.
Right.
Right?
Exactly
but
true.
If I say, hey, well, I have an opportunity over here that sounds exactly like the thing that you want to be doing, then your ears will perk up. That's influence. I can influence you that way, but I also have to be willing. You see, I've been influenced by you. I've allowed myself to hear what you wanted.
Right.
So influence is like a two-way street.
Yes.
And so when he says all transformation is based upon suggestion, and this can work only where you lay yourself completely open to an influence, I think it has to do with the suggestion is the idea. Now, does it come from without us or from within? I mean, to some degree, don't you think
either way,
all of our ideas come from without?
Mm-hmm.
Because how else would we, like, I wanted to do a podcast. Well, I had to know what a podcast was.
Mm-hmm.
I had to.
But the impetus can also come from within. But you're right, there has to be an interaction there because the impetus can't come from within unless there's a referent. And that referent is the podcast.
And so laying yourself completely open to an influence, I think, is being willing to assume that concept or that ideal of yourself. Mm-hmm. We talked about the story of, because I had heard someone talk about it, and it's a really good example. Our ideas, not ideals, but the ideas we have, the perceptions we have of what it takes to do a certain thing, may be completely not true. So if I think that a best-selling author, because I went to see a book signing one time, it was David Sedaris, and my friend worked at the bookstore that he was signing books there, and she said later, oh yeah, we stayed open till 2 a.m.
Oh wow.
There was a line wrapped around the store, and he insisted on looking each person in the eye, speaking with them, finding out something about them, signing their book with a message, He did not rush through it.
Good for him.
And that's probably why he has so many fans, right?
Yeah.
But he really takes the time with his fans. Okay, so, wow, if that's my only perception of a best-selling author, and I don't like to travel, and I don't like to stay up past 10, I may really love writing and really love the idea of having a best-selling book, but some part of me might be saying, you don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to travel 300 days a year and stay up till 3 a.m. every night. Like, that is not you. You don't want that, right? And so I'm not laying myself open completely
No.
to that idea, right?
Right.
So I think the important part to interject here is recognizing that sometimes we have perceptions and ideas that aren't even true. I guarantee you there are best-selling authors out there who don't do book tours and who aren't staying up past 10.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But you're right. We often don't make the association the other way, just the one way that we saw, and that's the one that sticks with us.
So when we can get an idea that syncs up with what we want, then I think we can abandon ourselves to that ideal and say, yes, I am wide open for this. I am ready for this. I will receive this.
So when he's saying this can only work where you lay yourself completely open to an influence, what he's implying there is you want to find in what way you can be open to an influence. Just because you aren't open one way doesn't mean you can't be open another way. You have to find your particular way to be open.
And I mean, that's what I'm seeing. I'm going back to the 3rd chapter where we talked about a united will, where we talked about assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled with our whole being.
Right.
So part of us wasn't arguing about it. We were on board. And so that's the beauty of creating the story the way you want it to unfold.
Absolutely.
My own story of best-selling author, whatever that means, or whatever thing I want to create, not someone else's story of it, not how it worked for them.
And it makes
can
sense
work for you in a different way.
When we look at that way, it makes total sense, because how else could you attract what you want besides the way that makes sense for you? You can't attract it. You wouldn't want to attract it in a way that makes sense for somebody else. What would be the point of that?
Right. Yeah. And so that's the beautiful part, is we get to create it exactly the way it works for us best, right?
Yes, exactly.
So let's see. You must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled until your assumption has all the sensory vividness of reality. Talked about that. All the 5 senses.
Right.
Feel those things. You must imagine that you are already experiencing what you desire. That is, you must assume the feeling of the fulfillment of your desire until you are possessed by it. And this feeling crowds all other ideas out of your consciousness.
That's pretty intense. To crowd everything else? When everything else is crowded out of your... when the feeling crowds out all of your other ideas out of your consciousness, it's monomania practically. It's like I am so singly focused that I can't even perceive anything else right now.
You know what's interesting, though, is that this vignette that I was doing, what I noticed is that I would do it as I was falling asleep and a couple other times during the day. It's like I said before, I put a reminder on my phone.
Right.
3 times a day, it will pop up and say, it just says, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. So I would take 60 seconds and do it. But, it was popping up at other times without a reminder. Because it started to become habit. And I think it was crowding out other ideas.
Very interesting. Yeah, what you're talking about there is when we're reprogramming ourselves, as the programming starts to take hold, it behaves like those negative thoughts, the ones that we're trying to get rid of.
Yes.
But now it's a positive one. You've gotten a positive thought that's playing over and over again, and hopefully not annoyingly.
Right. No, it's like mental chatter that agrees with my vision.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The man who is not prepared for the conscious plunge into the assumption of the wish fulfilled in the faith that it is the only way to realization of his dream is not yet ready to live consciously by the law of assumption. Although there is no doubt that he does live by the law of assumption unconsciously. So we say this all the time, right? It's like everyone is using the law of attraction.
Absolutely.
Or being affected by the law of attraction. But some of us are doing it consciously, or attempting to do it consciously most of the time, and some of us aren't conscious of it.
Which was that was the big point in the previous chapter, which was called the law of assumption, or the power of assumption. That the way that we choose to assume is what directly influences what we experience. The assumptions set us up, whether it's a positive assumption or a negative assumption. It doesn't matter which one it is.
Exactly. So we're all doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our chance to get conscious of it.
Yes.
He says, but for you who accept this principle and are ready. It's funny because I just told that story, right, of somebody saying, oh, I'm God, and the universe is just a big reflection of my own love relationship with myself, and I wasn't ready.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's talking about right here. Like, some people aren't ready yet. But for you who accept this principle and are ready to live by consciously assuming that your wish is already fulfilled, the adventure of life begins. To reach a higher level of being, you must assume a higher concept of yourself. If you will not imagine
gotta
yourself...
go back to that. I gotta go back to that, sorry. Whenever I see...
To reach a higher level of being.
Yeah, whenever I see the words higher, or higher level, or higher being, something like that, I always have to stop and kind of do a little mental translation. What exactly does that mean? Because I think I've told you previously, whenever I hear something like higher being or higher self, there's like part of me that rebels against it, saying, what do you mean, it's better than I am? Which is not, of course, what is meant by it, but nevertheless, it kind of fits into what traditional religion is all about, bowing down to God and so forth. And it's like, no, I can't go that route. You got to give me a better route than that. So what is meant by higher being?
What I hear is reaching. Notice we use the word reaching when we say reaching our potential.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear reach a higher level of being, it's that I'm reaching for my potential.
Okay.
I'm creating something better.
That's much more palatable. Yeah.
Okay. So he says, if you will not imagine yourself as other than what you are, then you remain as you are.
This is it.
For if you believe not that I am he, you shall die in your sins. Now we're getting into the sin concept with Neville,
mm-hmm.
which once again, Neville is defining sin as the original language defined it, which is just missing the mark. It's shooting an arrow at a target and missing. And so how do we fix that? Well, we just take better aim, right? And we do that in our imagination.
It also implies if ye shall die in your sins, if that's the way the word sins is being used, then die probably also means something entirely different too. It's more metaphorical than an actual death, I would think.
It's what he says right here. You remain as you are.
Yes, exactly.
If you're not going to, assume something better, imagine yourself in a better situation, then you'll stay where you are.
Which is a kind of a slow death, really.
Right.
Yeah.
He says, if you do not believe that you are he, the person you want to be, then you remain as you are. Through the faithful, systematic cultivation of the feeling of the wish fulfilled, desire becomes the promise of its own fulfillment. The assumption of the feeling of the wish fulfilled makes the future dream a present fact. And I love that he says desire becomes the promise of its own fulfillment, because that's the way I think of desire. When I desire something, it's already, the desire is the confirmation that I'm going to have it because I'm desiring it. And it's the promise of its own fulfillment, the fact that I'm wishing for it, because I know that I'm going to faithfully and systematically cultivate the feeling of that wish. So it's happening.
That's a pretty advanced stance, actually. To start from the idea that if you've desired it, it's going to happen. That's for somebody first exposed to law of attraction thinking, that's like, whoa, that's way out there. So that's like an expression of development to feel it and to express it that way, I think.
Then we have to go back to remembering that is through the faithful, systematic cultivation of the feeling of the wish
exactly.
fulfilled.
Yeah, that's true. Now, something else, and I kind of skipped over because I wanted to go over that one concept, but once again, he brings in, this is like 5 paragraphs back, he brings in the sexual act and sexual relations as a way of metaphorically describing what's going on. And I didn't mean to skip over that. I just wanted to make sure I got that previous concept in. But he was talking about, let's see, here it is. All transformation is based upon suggestion, and this can only work where you lay yourself completely open to an influence, which we talked a lot about. You must abandon yourself to your ideal, as a woman abandons herself to love, for complete abandonment of self to it is the way to union with your ideal. Now, he's also previously talked about consciousness and subconsciousness, consciousness being the male, subconsciousness being the female. And so I'm sitting here saying to myself, there's a message in here. And I'm wondering what the message is, because I'm not quite getting where that connection is. Do you see that? Do you see where the connection is between conscious and subconscious and this? Okay, what is that?
Yes, because he is using the metaphor of a man and a woman conceiving a child. And he's talking about abandoning yourself to your ideal, so to your concept of yourself in the future, the thing you want to create, as a woman abandons herself to love. So for a woman and a man to conceive a child, the woman has to receive the man. Okay. She's willing and open and willing to receive, right? So she is opening herself up completely to her lover, to her husband, whatever, to the male. So when he's talking about consciousness and the subconscious and the conscious, like you said, he says the conscious is the male energy and that the subconscious is the female, because he uses that metaphor because he says the subconscious is like the womb of creation. It's where everything is happening. So the womb has to be willing to receive to be able for that conception to happen. And he says that's, a metaphor of how we have to be open to that ideal. We don't fight it away. We don't say no, like we're willing and ready and fertile to create something new. So I think that's the metaphor. So
there's a very specific connection going on there, that the willingness has to happen subconsciously.
Right. That's the united will. And also something that you brought up in the past when he used this metaphor is that it's an intimate connection.
Yeah.
Right? It's a deep connection. It's very intimate. It's very personal. And it's the place where all of us is on board with it.
Right.
It's a united will.
This is, it really does help to have the Neville decoder ring. It's more. It's actually more than a decoder ring. It's also a connector ring. It connects thoughts together that are disparate, that are spread out among the other chapters. Because you almost have to follow the roadmap to figure. Okay, well, he was making reference to something over here. What does it tie into over here? Oh yeah, I got it now.
Exactly. Well, that's why we're taking our time with it, and working our way through it.
It's a good thing too. We only have a couple minutes left, but first of all, congratulations to us. We actually got through an entire chapter in one episode.
Yay, we did it! Woo!
It's almost a shock when that happens, But that's
we won't mention how short the chapter is, but we did it.
Well, let's put it this way: when it's online, it looks fairly long. When you look in the book, it's 2 pages. It's like, really, we just did 2 pages? Short. That was it. Oh my goodness! But it shows how much fun we have talking about it. And we'll be picking up chapter 5 next time. But before we go separate ways for the day, I wanted to touch on 2 things. First, even though we weren't able to live stream today, I think I was actually missing it, because we've been starting to get some really nice interaction with our listeners who listen live in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group on Facebook. Right. And I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate them. Because, I've said it before, we have the best listeners in the world. I still believe that's true. They're growing in number, which I get excited about. And I just love the way that they have opened up to us. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
We're getting people who are asking questions now, and you can tell from the questions where they're coming from. You can get a flavor of what their experience is behind the question, and they're opening up. They're kind of like what we were talking about here. They're willing to be influenced. They're willing to receive, right? And I'm just loving that. And I'm loving the feedback we get. I'm loving the love they get. Oh my goodness, the love they've been giving us in their commentary has been just fabulous. So I don't know. I guess I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you, because you guys are great. Every one of you are wonderful. I just love you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I agree.
Oh, and we also got to put another moment out there for you too. We always try to do this at the end of every episode. You're a life coach, and you're a darn good one. So you like to receive direct contact too, directly through your website and so forth.
I do. You can reach out to me at my website, cindiechavez.com. CINDIEDHAVEZ.com. There's a contact form there. I would love to hear from you.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous because I get to receive contact through what we do here. You get to receive contact through this and through your website. You get it both ways. No, I'm kidding. I love it. I think it's great. Well, this has been good. I mean, and plus this has been a victory day because I got my book, so I'm ready to get going. I'm ready to dive through the other, what do we got, 23 chapters left in this particular book. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm ready too.
In the meantime, have
here in the States, tomorrow's Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Happy Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
We're thankful for you.
Yes, we are very grateful for every one of you. And I don't know, I guess that's all there is. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.